Hi, good morning. This is Gail Lee. I'm the president of Board of Aging Advantage, and we're bringing this last in our series of talks on preparing your legacy. And we're doing that in partnership, this series in partnership with Eamon Gattner Capriano, estate planning law firm. And Aging Advantage is a nonprofit here in the St. Louis area. And we bring these different presentations to you from that are partially funded by donations and support from the City of St. Louis ARPA funds that primarily are to help city households that have experienced negative public health or an economic impact due to COVID-19. But I think that, you know, those people need, even more of a leg up, but everybody can use this information. So I think it's really helpful in that regard. And in general, we help people with care management and different mental health supports and home delivered meal assessments and, kind of benefit planning and classes and family caregiver support. So, Amanda Wilson, who is here with the law firm, I'm going to have her go ahead and introduce herself and what part the law firm has been doing.
All right, thanks, Gail. So we've been doing this series for the past, 7 sessions. This will be our 8th, and we've called this series Preparing Your Legacy. It's your roadmap to planning, protection, and peace of mind. And today, what Gail and I are going to do is essentially just wrap everything together for you. So why does it all matter? How does it all fit together? And what can you do moving forward to sort of take this information and be proactive with it, and what steps need to be taken moving forward. So today is sort of a reflection on planning and purpose, and we're going to try to answer the question, how can planning provide me with peace of mind as I consider the realities of aging, and what does that look like for you? So a little bit on Eamon Gattner and Capriano. Gail and I both work here at the law firm. We dedicate our legal practice to estate planning, elder law, and related matters. So we also do some postmortem work, probate, trust administration, that sort of thing. In this photo here are Jackie, Charlie, and Paul, who are the partners. We're all members of the National Academy of Elder Law Attorneys and the American Academy of Estate Planning Attorneys, and we're all also accredited by the VA to handle veterans claims. So this is me. I'm an attorney licensed in the state of Missouri, working on my licensure in the state of Illinois as well. I have a BA in English and Economics from the University of Mississippi, and I have my JD from Wake Forest University. But I'm from St. Louis, born and raised, actually about 5 minutes from our office here. And as I mentioned before, I'm a member of NALA and also the American Academy of Estate Planning Attorneys, and I am accredited by the VA as well. So this is our elder law team at Eamon Gattner and Capriano. So you've met Gail already and myself, and then there's also another LCSW, licensed clinical social worker on our staff. Her name is Maggie. And we really work hand in hand on each case that comes our way, and that's because we sort of want to provide just the absolute best holistic approach to aging and care needs as we can. So where have we been these past 7 sessions? We started with why planning matters. So we did an entire presentation on what an estate plan is, what an estate plan should look like or can look like. And then we talked about elder law and how elder law and estate planning sort of go hand in hand with one another. And you shouldn't have one without the other. And we talked about long-term care planning. So how do we sort of combine estate planning with long-term care planning to set those of us who are in that sort of senior age group up for success as they look at planning and paying for long-term care expenses? One of the big points that we tried to hit is that failing to plan is planning to fail. So without an estate plan, without a long-term care plan, the only individual you're hurting is yourself and your loved ones. who will need to, have a plan sooner or later. And if you choose later, it just limits your options. It limits your ability to finance long-term care planning. And as far as estate planning goes, without a plan, you lose the autonomy over what happens and when. You don't create an estate plan for yourself. You create an estate plan for the causes and people that you care about. And while that is absolutely true, there are aspects of an estate plan that you do create for yourself. And we'll talk about those a little bit more on the next slide. But in the context of wills and trusts, you use those documents to take care of those around you who you love. The costliest mistake of the average senior is lacking a plan for long-term care. Gail and I can't emphasize this enough, that without a plan, you will spend more money. Your options will be limited. And sort of when you look at the spectrum of long-term care, you have less option there as well. And then we talked about the 5 ways to pay for long-term care. So there are only 5 ways to pay. You can private pay for long-term care, meaning use your own money. And the unfortunate reality with that option is that the vast majority of us do not have, an unlimited pool of resources with which to pay for long-term care. So for many, many people, private pay is only an option for a finite amount of time. So then you need to think about, okay, what are my other options? What are the other ways I can pay for this care? One is long-term care insurance. It's wonderful, very beneficial if you have it. Many, many people have dropped their policies because premiums have increased exorbitantly over the past few years. And too many people try to get long-term care insurance when it's already too late. If there's already a diagnosis, you're not going to get a policy. Also, many people don't realize that long-term care policies are usually, not always, limited in some way. So it's either a sum certain that pays out, or it might pay out for a definitive amount of time. But there's no guarantee that that long-term care insurance policy that you might have will pay for all the care you need for the duration of your life. Unless in, somewhat rare circumstances when we do have policies that say that. But that's sort of the exception and not the general rule. Then your third way to pay for long-term care is Medicare. And Medicare is lovely. Think of it as insurance for those over 65. It does a really good job of paying for hospital stays, doctor visits, things like that. And it also covers the cost of rehabilitation in nursing facilities. But Medicare will not cover the cost of assisted living or independent living or long-term skilled nursing care. So then your fourth option is Medicaid. And a lot of people use Medicare and Medicaid interchangeably, but keep them separate in your mind. There are very different programs with very different rules. And Medicare, I would venture to say, is more common than Medicaid for people. They're a little bit more knowledgeable about Medicare. Medicaid is a big umbrella term, and there are all kinds of programs that Medicaid funds. The ones we talked about were home and community-based Medicaid and vendor Medicaid, and then something called cash grant Medicaid. And we'll kind of go over those a little bit more in the future. But Medicaid is an option to pay for long-term care, whether we're looking at in-home care or even assisted living or long-term skilled nursing care. And then your last way to pay is VA benefits. So for certain qualifying veterans, the VA offers what's called the aid and attendance benefits. And we'll talk about those a little bit more later as well, but just know it's an option for some people to sort of subsidize the cost of long-term care. So that is briefly what we touched in our first session. Then in our second session, we went into a little bit more detail on estate planning. And we specifically talked about the 5 documents that absolutely everyone over the age of majority, which is 18 in Missouri, should have. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. The first is your property power of attorney. That allows your agent to make financial decisions for you if you would need some help. Things like if you got hit by a car tomorrow, someone could make sure your bills are paid, and things like that. So that's a property power of attorney. Then there's the healthcare power of attorney. Healthcare power of attorney has the ability to make healthcare decisions for you if you would not be able to make them for yourself. And in one of our later sessions, we talked a lot about making sure you choose an agent who has your best wishes in mind and the healthcare decisions that you would want made, not what they might want or what they might think, and someone who won't let the emotions of the situation get the better of them. So healthcare power of attorney is also super important. In many states, there's actually a statute that essentially gives people an automatic healthcare power of attorney, right? If you don't have the document in place, your spouse could make the decision for you or your child. In Missouri, that's not the case. Without an executed healthcare power of attorney, no one is able to make healthcare decisions for you if you're not able to make them for yourself. And that's why that document is so important here. Next, absolutely necessary document is a HIPAA authorization. That just allows your loved ones to know what's happening in the event that you can't make medical decisions for yourself. The doctors will then talk to your loved one, your healthcare power of attorney, about that. So super handy. And the last couple documents we really talked in depth about were the advanced directives and living will. So in a living will, you are able to tell whether, if two doctors have personally examined you and they've determined that there is no hope, whether you would wish to be kept artificially alive at that point or not. I would say the vast majority of people don't want that, but if you do, that's perfectly fine too. These documents are sort of good ways of getting you to start thinking about what type of care would I want? What type of care do I not want if the worst happens? Because none of us want to think that these awful things are going to happen to us, but the unfortunate reality is it happens and it could be you, and you need to be prepared in the event that it would be. And then you have your advanced directives, and the advanced directives just get a little bit more specific than the living will. So they list a bunch of different options, and you can initial by each one. And by doing so, what you're doing is allowing your healthcare power of attorney the ability to remove that form of support if you're in the situation we discussed in the living will. So if there is no hope. An example that I like to use that I think sort of clarifies the distinction here is if, let's say you were in a coma and you develop pneumonia. The doctors will give you antibiotics to treat that pneumonia, right? It will not make the coma go away. You might never wake up, but you also won't die from pneumonia. In the advanced directives, one of the options is antibiotics. And so you can initial that, and your healthcare power of attorney could then tell the doctor, no, I don't want her to have treatment for the pneumonia. And then maybe you do pass away from the pneumonia, maybe you don't, but it gives the healthcare power of attorney a little bit more authority and autonomy to make healthcare decisions in your best interest. And then I would say most, if not all, people need either a will or a trust. And we talked a little bit about the distinctions between a will and a trust. A will directs probate, right? A will is public. It's a matter of public record. So if you go through the probate process with a will, all of that is public. A trust is not that way. It's a lot more private. A trust offers a lot more flexibility in planning. And most people should have those documents as well. But here we really wanted to focus on the documents that were and are important during life, right? And they're important when we think about the long-term care planning context, because without these powers of attorney in place, sometimes we have clients who come and capacity is already sort of gone for the individual who needs care. And so we're not able to do powers of attorney anymore. And we need to do planning in order to get them qualified for Medicaid benefits or VA benefits. And it really limits our ability to do a lot of those things if those powers of attorney aren't in place, because then we're looking at, well, maybe a guardianship or a conservatorship, and those are significantly more expensive, significantly more time consuming, and it involves the court. So as much as possible, we want people to have these powers of attorney in place, these healthcare documents in place, so that they're really set up for success as they look toward aging. So that was our second session. In our third session, we talked a lot about care management and choosing care. And this visual that I have on this slide here is one that Gail made. And I think it does a really good job of showing sort of all of the different facets that are involved in sort of this aging process and looking at planning for your later years. And oftentimes a really crucial tool in your arsenal will be a care manager, because a care manager is able to sort of balance all of these different little circles and make sure that you are set up as best you can be for success. They bring clarity and coordination. They help a lot with family disputes and the difficulties that come with family who are providing care, and look into things like family meetings, which we talked a little bit about, to sort of get everybody on the same page, make sure there's a plan in place that'll work for everyone involved.
I think it's almost like a quarterback, you know, kind
Right.
of helping with that and bringing all the pieces together. And I think a lot of times the people do need that extra advocacy to bring all those pieces together. And sometimes if they're vulnerable, they're afraid to, reach out, and maybe they feel like they're just complaining or what have you. And I think with the family meetings, we noticed that we need a lot more information about that. So I think in the future we'll have a class just on family meetings.
And it's really, I mean, and maybe you can speak to this a little bit, Gail, but it's about advocacy, right? A care manager is an advocate for you all day long in whatever realm we're talking about. So maybe it's coordination with a doctor or with a law firm like ours to make sure your needs are being met, from care to your finances to, every aspect of getting the care you need and what aging looks like for you.
And I think with a lot of the vulnerable populations too, maybe one example in terms of a home care or chore worker, people, well, we had this with a client you and I had, where sometimes the people come and they're just like sitting watching TV or fiddling with their phone or what have you, and not really doing the things. And the people, depending on what's happening, they're too afraid to complain about it or tell their agency that that's happening because they're concerned about what will even happen to their service. So having someone else that's kind of watching and can communicate that is important. Or with some of the home care, there's the consumer direct services where they hire somebody, and sometimes they're, of course, hiring, a grandchild or a different relative, and then the relative's really not necessarily coming. So there's kind of a lot of things with that they're, afraid to do. Or with doctor's appointments, you go in and the doctor's explaining a lot of complex things, or they're even asking questions, and the person doesn't really relay everything. So having someone there that can help interpret and help bring that feedback back to the family, but also just to the person, so it's a lot for them to take in at one time.
Right, and there's a lack of bias there that I think is useful. Whereas when you have family members who are sort of stepping into that role, there are biases that become involved that make it a little more complicated. And just the experience of the care manager. They have been through this so many times with so many individuals that are facing, similar difficulties as you, that they know the right questions to ask. They know the avenues to go down. They know the resources that are available. And so those are all greatly beneficial. So in part 3, we talked about care management and choosing care. Then we really dove deeper into those last 2 ways to pay that I was talking about before. So we dove into Medicaid and VA benefits and what they look like. Like I said before, Medicaid is a big umbrella, but we really focused on home and community-based Medicaid. So that's Medicaid that will offer you some care in the home, which is great. Um, we talked about Cash Grant, which is a program provided by Medicaid that offers sort of a bit of help with paying for assisted living. It does not pay for all of assisted living, but it will sort of supplement your assisted living expenses. And then vendor Medicaid. And vendor Medicaid is sort of, I think, what the majority of people think of when they think of Medicaid in the senior care context. It is Medicaid that pays for long-term skilled nursing care. Um, it doesn't pay for 100% of long-term skilled nursing care. You have to pay what is known as your surplus, sort of like an insurance deductible. And it's your income less any medical insurance premiums that you have, less $50 a month that you get to keep. So you get a whole whopping $50 a month, which probably doesn't even pay for a haircut in the facility for that month. And so when we talked about Medicaid, we really dove into, and there are many strategies, but just know that there are strategies that we can use in order to get you qualified for Medicaid before you would otherwise organically qualify. And what that means is that a lot of times we can use things like strategic gifting and the implementation of trusts in order to get you qualified for Medicaid, yes, but also to set aside some of your assets so that there are assets there, if you should want a wheelchair later on, or if you just want to leave a little money because you've worked your entire life and all you wanted to do was make sure your children were set up for success. And so there are ways for us to do that and to make sure if you still have a spouse that's in the community, that spouse will have plenty of money to be able to take care of themselves and eventually even pay for their own long-term care expenses. And so Medicaid is a great option for many, many people. So is VA aid and attendance. And like I mentioned before, qualifying veterans are eligible to receive funds to subsidize in-home care, assisted living, and even skilled nursing care. So VA aid and attendance is beneficial in that it's very broad. But an important thing to keep in mind here is that the qualifications to apply for and be approved for Medicaid versus VA are very, very different. So you really need someone who is experienced with both VA and Medicaid to help you on either of these application processes. And oftentimes nursing facilities, they say, we can help you with your Medicaid application. That can be okay. But just know that these applications, they look very different. And both application processes are time intensive, they're complicated, they require a whole lot of documentation. And so I would really highly recommend if you're thinking about, oh, my loved one might need one of these benefits, or one of these benefits could help my loved one, come and see Gail and I, or reach out to other, firms that do something similar. Get someone with experience to help you in this area. Then in part 5, we sort of pivoted back toward the care context, right? And and what care looks like for people suffering from different diseases. And so we talked a lot about dementia and other special health considerations. When we think about dementia diagnoses, preparation and proactivity are absolutely essential. Since there are concerns with capacity, especially as dementia progresses, it's extremely important to have your legal documents in place sooner rather than later. And then when we think about the caregiving side of sort of these different illnesses, caregiving is more intensive in the context of dementia and other progressive illnesses. So we talked about multiple sclerosis, and we talked about ALS, we talked about Huntington's. We talked about some of these really debilitative chronic diseases that sort of have an individual in a gradual decline over a longer period of time. And why these diseases are important to think about is because we are looking at needing care for a much more extended period of time. And so we need to be smarter about using the financial resources available, using the benefits available. And then we really looked at how these different illnesses also affect the individual, their emotional needs, their care concerns. So, some of these illnesses really put an individual at a risk of having falls in the home. That's an important thing to keep in mind. Different things like that really sort of narrow you into, okay, this is exactly what I need to be concerned about if me or if a loved one has a diagnosis like this. We talked a lot about balancing independence and safety in these contexts. So we want an individual to have independence, to have autonomy, to have dignity. But safety is also super important, and knowing when that balance is off and how you or your loved one, you need to pivot and sort of change your plan, develop your plan over time, right? Even if at the very beginning of the diagnosis, let's say your mom was diagnosed with dementia, and even if we say before diagnosis, she said, I want to die in my home, I don't want to go anywhere. And just circumstances have made it such that keeping her there is now impossible. Okay, we need to pivot the plan, right? We need to think about, okay, maybe we're not looking at in-home care anymore. Maybe we're looking at a facility. And what will that look like in all of these contexts? What will that look like as far as medical care? What does that look like financially? Everything. And really preparing your legacy is an act of love. And I know we talked a lot about this in this particular session, but that's sort of a comment from overall in this presentation, right? Being prepared, having a plan, it gives you peace of mind, yes. It gives your loved ones peace of mind too. And it's an act of love to those who you might leave behind, because you give them instructions, you give them your words and your wishes. And at the end of the day, most people just want to do what they think is best for you, yes, but what you wanted them to do. But if you don't tell anyone that, it's much, much more difficult for them to make that happen. So then in part 6, we talked about hospice and end-of-life considerations. So we talked a lot about palliative care, what that looks like, when that might be effective. And then we talked about hospice care as well, when hospice is available for an individual. So patients, you qualify for hospice with a life expectancy of 6 months or less. But we also talked about the fact that many people are on hospice for much longer than 6 months. And there's this misconception in the community that hospice means you're dying tomorrow. It doesn't mean that. But what hospice does give you is a multidisciplinary team in varied settings, and allows you to sort of focus on quality of life versus the time you might have left. So we talked about hospice, and then we talked about what end of life treatments you would desire, right? So we talked about CPR. Would you want CPR? We talked about how traumatic CPR really is on the body and the odds of your recovery long term after having CPR. We also talked about things like ventilators and feeding tubes, whether these are sort of life-sustaining measures that you would want or not want. Then we also talked about the POLST forms that are available in Missouri. These are sort of out of hospital DNR forms that you can have in place. DNRs do not resuscitate. Um, and I think some people get living will and advanced directives confused with the DNR. Because in the living will, you are saying, I don't want to be kept alive if there is no hope. But you're not saying, don't give me CPR. You're not saying, I don't want a ventilator. In the advanced directive, you might be giving your healthcare power of attorney the authority to remove that form of support or not to have you begin that form of support, but you're not mandating it either. And the wonderful thing about those POLST forms is that they're effective inside and out of the hospital. So you fill those forms out with your doctor and you keep it somewhere where it's prominent, it's easily reached. And in that way, if you have a heart attack in your kitchen and the ambulance comes and they see that form or someone hands them that form, they won't do CPR if you have it marked on there that you do not want CPR. And the big difference there is a lot of times people have DNRs that are in place in the hospital possibly, but they don't have the out of hospital protections in the same way. So these were just a few of the things that we went over in sort of the final stages of the care journey, right? Too many people either don't know they can qualify for palliative care or hospice care, or they wait too long to get those supports as well. And there's no reason to wait, right? I think too many people think it's some sort of indication of what's to come, but what's to come is coming whether you get this support or you don't. So it's a good option for many, many people. Now, our last series, which was on Monday, we talked about community resources that are available. And we really are lucky in St. Louis. Our senior care community is extraordinary. And there are hundreds of organizations that are out there to help you with all kinds of different areas of sort of aging and what that looks like and what you might need. So, I mean, from meals and nutrition to transportation to home repairs, caregiver support, case management, legal and financial matters, emotional support, companionship. There are so many different areas, and there are organizations in St. Louis to help you with every single one of them. Don't be ashamed or afraid to seek assistance from people. Every single one of these organizations exists to help you and to help people like you. And there is nothing wrong with asking for that support. And no one can navigate aging or caregiving by themselves. Too many, I think, family members who are caregivers think, okay, I can take all of this on, in addition to what I might already have going on in my life, completely independent of this caregiving role. And oftentimes it's simply too much for a person. So really being aware of your limits, as a caregiver and as an individual who might need to be receiving care but isn't yet, how much strain are you willing to put on yourself to make a meal every day or to, make it into a bathroom that no longer really works for you before you say, okay, it's time to make a change and it's time to reach out and get support in, maybe it's one area. Maybe you just really need help with a few home repairs, or maybe you just can't seem to make dinner anymore, okay, get help in that context. And for some people, they need help sort of across this spectrum, and that's okay too. But really, we would recommend you build your resource network, know what's out there, or know who you can go to who will know what's out there, right? Aging Advantage is a great resource here that they know all the resources available for you, and they provide things like case management to help you sort of navigate this complex array of aging concerns that might be facing you. So that's what we talked about in our last series, and sort of a brief, somewhat brief overview of everywhere we have been in this entire series, Preparing Your Legacy. And so now what did we do? What do you do with all of this information, right? What does this mean? How do you take an actionable step on any of this stuff, right? You might be sitting there thinking, okay, good information, but nothing for me to do, you know? Well, we have a few things that we're going to recommend to you. And the first is to develop your legacy action plan. And your legacy action plan is a blueprint for peace of mind. And you're going to start a binder, right? It's going to be your legacy binder. Maybe if you're already clients of our firm, you might have a binder that has your trust in it, has some of your important legal documents in it, your powers of attorney, your healthcare documents, all of that. That's wonderful. It's a great place to put all of this information too. You can put it in the back tab, right? That says legacy on it. Organize your tabs though, even if you're not a client here, okay? Make your own binder, right? Make a binder and have tabs for legal, medical, financial, care, resources, and even one for reflections, right? Something that you can leave to your family members. And then in each tab, organize and make a plan, right? In your legal tab, maybe that's a great place to keep all of your legal documents that you need to have in place. Tell your loved ones about this binder too. Tell them where you're keeping it. It'll have all of your important information, right? Financially, there was someone who came to one of Gail's Find Out Fridays. She spoke at it a couple months ago, and she had a great little, it was like a book packet, right? That had all these different templates to sort of lay out, these are all my finances, this is where they are, these are the account numbers. That's super important for your loved ones to know if something happens to you, right? If you pass away, yes, but even if you don't pass away, they need to know where everything's at.
And I think too, with that, Amanda, she had like a safe that was very cool. It was like more made out of material that was very easy to carry, but it was fireproof and stuff. And so it seemed like it was pretty low cost from Amazon, but that way it was all in there and easy to pick up too, because other safes are kind of harder to do sometimes.
That's right. And it makes it even easier to tell your family members this is where it's at, right? They're not digging through shelves for a binder or looking in desk drawers for a binder. Maybe they're looking in a designated place. The easier you can make it, the better, right? Right? Preparing your legacy, it's an act of love. You're doing this for your loved ones. So those are great things to have in that financial tab, right? What do I have? Where is it at? What are the important documents? You know, maybe you put your car titles in there. Maybe you put the deed to your house in there.
And
I can't
I
tell you.
think also we were talking about pre-talking to the people to let them know not even just where it is, but that they're the ones that are in charge of it. It's like so many people don't do that.
That's exactly right. Yeah. Tell your agents that they're your agents, right? Tell your power of attorney that they're healthcare power of attorney or their property power of attorney, because letting them know that that's their responsibility is super important. Um, and I can't tell you as far in a long-term care perspective, how many people come in here, or just as often, how many people's children come in here and they say, okay, I need long-term care for my mom or my spouse. And we give them a whole list of documents that we have to submit with the application. And they have not an idea on God's green earth where any of this stuff is, how to get it, or what's even around. We had a client a couple months ago who came in and said she had, you know, about $20,000. Her husband needed care. it turned out through a long process that there was like, I mean, so much more than that. We were well into the hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? And so people just don't know. And if you prepare and have a legacy plan in place, you yourself or you and your spouse, it will make tackling these difficulties that arise with age that much easier. And that's what we all want. Same with medical. Medical decisions should go in this binder. Your healthcare documents should go in this binder. Let people know what you want to, in what circumstances, because there are a million circumstances, and everybody's a little bit different. If you think, okay, if I've got a good shot, yeah, tell them to give me CPR or keep me on the vent or keep me around for a while, but if it's been 3 weeks and nothing has changed, okay, then it's time for me. I'm done. Write it down and put it somewhere where people can find it. After you sort of create this binder, and as you're doing it, sort of actively identify what is complete and what needs attention, right? Maybe you have your healthcare documents in place, but you don't have a property power of attorney in place, or you don't have a will or a trust in place, or maybe you have healthcare documents that are 20 years old. It's time to update those. The law changes, your preferences change over time. So really start to pick out, these are the areas I need to focus more on. When we talk about the care tab for your binder, okay, maybe, 15 years ago you were thinking, yeah, absolutely, no matter what, I want to stay in my home. But now your spouse has passed away and maybe you have a 2-story home and it's just getting more and more and more difficult for you to manage at the house. And so maybe you're really thinking more about what would independent living look like for me, or even assisted living look like for me. So by developing this binder, you're sort of starting to pick out all these pieces and all these aspects of aging that maybe need your attention, need some work. And so then you set small, achievable goals for yourself to fill in these gaps, right? This week, I'm going to tackle care. What do I want it to look like? When am I, willing to go to a facility? How long do I want in-home care? Can I apply for any of these benefits? Okay, maybe I think I might be eligible for VA and attendance. Next week, I'm going to set an appointment with someone who does and helps with VA applications. Great, do it. You're sort of on the road to shoring up this plan. And just remember that planning is never stagnant. It's a lifelong process. So even if you do all of this right now and you feel like you've got it all worked out, you've got everything set up really well, keep looking at it. Look at it once a year, make sure that everything is still up to date, that your wishes are still being honored, that they haven't changed. And keep all of this in mind as you move through your life. It doesn't need to be scary and it doesn't need to be morbid. I think too often we think of aging and people shy away from it because they think it's preparing for death. And nobody really wants to think about their own dying. But it's just a reality, no one gets out of this alive. And the more planning you can do and the more proactive you're able to be, the better off you are and the better off everyone in your life is.
And I think we mentioned too that, just thinking about it and planning doesn't make it happen, and so many people think, well, if I do that, then it's going to make it happen. But eventually it is going to happen, but it's not making it happen when you plan it out.
No, absolutely not. And you just never know. You never know. We have people who come in here and plan for their spouse because their spouse needs care. And then before you know it, it's the well spouse who something happens to and they quickly deteriorate. You just never know. And the earlier you can sort of think about these things, the better off you are, the better off your spouse is, the better off your loved ones are. So another thing that we would really like to recommend for you is reflecting on your legacy and reflecting on the purpose behind all of this. I know we've been talking about so many documents in these series, and we've been talking about all these resources that you can have, and you should have, make a spreadsheet with all of these resources. It's a lot of paperwork, but it's also about values, and it's about memory, and it's about connection. It's about the people you leave behind. It's about the causes you care about. Um, and that's what legacy is, as much as it is having a plan in place. Um, and we want you to consider the emotional and spiritual impacts of your planning, right? It doesn't have to be a completely unemotional thing. It's a hard thing to do, to think about what would I want in these very difficult circumstances. So just be patient with yourself and maybe write a personal message to your loved ones, right? I would have loved to have a letter from my grandfather that was, maybe guidance, or maybe just a letter of gratitude, something like that. Maybe write a letter for yourself, for your future self, right? That says, I did all of this for these reasons. This is what I wanted. So don't make any of this too impersonal, because it's all extremely personal to you. And what we want is, we want you to be set up the best way you possibly can be for yourself, right? For your future self. And so that you are prepared to enter into the aging process and not have it age you, right? So that's super important. And then here we just made you a little checklist. And so this would be great if you want to screenshot it, if you want to print it out, on really a lot of the things that you should be thinking about. And when you're thinking about preparing your legacy, these are a lot of things you should be doing. Organizing your legal and healthcare documents, financial and insurance information, making sure those are up to date. Check your beneficiary designations on all of your accounts. Make sure you have those set up the way you want them to be. Write out your care preferences, share those with your family. Community resources and contacts. Make sure you do have a document that is listing some of those that might be handy for you. Write and record your reflections or a family letter. Know who to contact for ongoing support, right? So if you make this great plan and you're like, well, what if something goes wrong? Have somebody in mind, right? Have us in mind. Contact us if you have an emergency, because what we want to avoid with all this, right, is crisis planning and sort of the emergent of the aging process. And the reality is, as much planning as you can do, sometimes things come up and plans need to change. Know who you want to contact when that's the case. Share your legacy binder location with trusted individuals, like we were talking about. Have a safe, have a designated place for that, and have a person who knows where it is. And then schedule a yearly review, right? Let's say you get all of this together right before Thanksgiving. So then you say, okay, every year, right before Thanksgiving, I'm going to look at all of this. I'm going to make sure everything is still up to date, right? Maybe you open a bank account in a year. Maybe you get a new CD. Okay, you need to add that to the financial tab. Or maybe you updated your healthcare documents and you changed your healthcare power of attorney. Okay, you need to include that in your binder. So just make sure everything is staying current and it's not stagnating, because a plan really is no good if it's something that was developed long ago and is no longer relevant to you. And so those are just a few of the recommendations we have. And of course, you are always welcome to contact me or Gail with anything you need. If you have any questions, you can put them in Facebook and we'll get back to you. I've also listed all of our information here. So it's my email as well as Gail's, and you have our office number. You can get in contact with either one of us there, and the website for the law firm as well. And we really hope that you enjoyed this series. It was a lot of fun to do. Gail and I are working on getting this sort of into a book format. So hopefully, a lot of these sort of action steps we have for you, you'll be able to write out there. And if you can't revisit this PowerPoint, maybe you can have it in book form, and that would be helpful for you as well. So
And also, we're available to come and do, presentation at your, community or senior center or church, and we can do, the whole series or do a summary of it. And so we're always up for that. But from Aging Advantage, we're so happy that you know, kind of dedicated all this time to help do this particular series because I think it was really important. There, and I see that you have the dates up. They are on our Facebook page, and they kind of get moved to YouTube, so you can go find them if you subscribe to our Facebook and YouTube channel. And they stay on the YouTube for um, forever, I guess. Like Facebook takes the lives down after 30 days, so then you can find them on YouTube.
Well, thank you, Gail, for allowing me the opportunity to do this presentation with you and with Aging Advantage. It was wonderful, and I think it's super important information. And I think it's beneficial to our community. And at the end of the day, I know we're both so passionate about the aging community and doing everything we can for our seniors. So it's been wonderful.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks. Please, well, you don't have another one in this series to join us on, but hopefully we'll get the family meeting program out. But we have programs each week. You can follow our page, Aging Advantage Facebook page, and it always tells what's coming up. So thanks again for joining us.
Thank you.